This week, Israel's foreign ministry is hosting its annual Global Forum for Combating Anti-Semitism. The event in Jerusalem brings together top officials and activists involved in fighting Jew hatred, an event that is particularly timely this year, given the recent surge of serious incidents coinciding with Israel's conflict with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Now, among the key speakers at the forum was Israel's new Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Dr. Nachman Shai, who has long experience in Jewish communal issues as the former Director General of the United Jewish Communities. Now, anti-Semitism will be just one of the challenges that he faces in his new role. Having said that, he'll also endeavor to heal a breach that has opened in recent years between Israel and many in the Jewish diaspora. Earlier, he joined me in studio, and here's that conversation. Dr. Nachman Shai, thank you for joining us on I-24 News. Now, you've been this week at the Forum for Combating Anti-Semitism. As I said, it's something that seems especially timely now. Tell me what you're hearing there from those community leaders and activists, and what you're telling them about how you can help them in their struggle.
First of all, we are partnering with the Foreign Ministry to organize this global forum. This was the 7th one. There was a relatively small because of the corona, so we couldn't host too many people at the same time in the same place. But we attach a lot of importance to that, and we would like very much that the message about anti-Semitism and combating anti-Semitism will come from Jerusalem. It's like what we say, מירושלים תצא תורה. Because it's our interest.
Jerusalem goes forth to Torah.
Absolutely, because I think this is our interest. And it has actually bigger importance, I would say. We are responsible, in a way, to Jews living outside the country. And we have to defend them against anti-Semitism. This is Israel's responsibility at this stage in our history. This is the biggest Jewish community in the world now. And this is a state, because then we can coordinate our operations with other governments, with other state authorities all around the globe. And as much as I see it, it's important now more than ever because of the rise in anti-Semitism after the military operation in Gaza, the last one, Garden of Words. There's a rise of 600% in Britain. The 25% in the United States, and so on and so forth. We have to look at it and ask ourselves why. It's a different matter. But combating anti-Semitism should be very high on Israel's agenda.
Right. Now, as you mentioned, there's been this surge in anti-Semitism during and the aftermath of Israel's operation in Gaza. And a lot of the anti-Semitism is connected directly with Israel, taking the guise of demonization of Israel, of anti-Zionism. But at the same time, there are differing opinions in the global Jewish community what constitutes legitimate criticism of Israel versus demonization shading into anti-Semitism. So how do you define that and then communicate and get a unified message out of that?
It's interesting because there was one sentence in my speech which I repeated twice. I don't do it, but I like that sentence very much. And it says that not any criticism on Israel is automatically or naturally anti-Semitism. No, we welcome, in a way, criticism. That's fine. We live in an open world, a democratic world, most of it, especially the countries that we care for. But they are purely, there's purely anti-Semitism sometimes that we can see. It's based on hatred and demonization and other aspects of anti-Semitism, according to the IRA definition.
Right.
But we have to distinguish between criticism. Maybe we deserve it. That's fine, and we know how to deal with that. And anti-Semitism. We will not accept any anti-Semitism, and we expect every government on earth, especially after 75 years, but it's still very live in our history, the Holocaust. At the same time, yes, things that we do, operations that we launch, everything Israel is doing is open for criticism, not necessarily criticism. Some people will agree with us as well. But that's fine. That's how democracy should be handled. But anti-Semitism we would not tolerate, and we'll do everything we can as the Jewish state.
Right. Well, certainly Israel has to do what it has to do to defend itself.
Right.
Nachman.
There's no doubt
But at the
about
same
it.
time, though, does that put an extra the scenario you just described? Put an extra burden on Israel to make sure, for example, it satisfactorily communicates to the world. This is why we're doing the issue. There's always been the issue of Hasbara in Israel, of public diplomacy, and you've written about this. You've been critical of Israel about this in the past.
I'm still very critical, and I think we failed. There was a huge failure of Israel's public diplomacy in this war, and this mini war. And I was extremely upset, you know, Calev, because I was watching the American media. I was out of the country at the beginning of this operation. And I was asking myself, so I spent years of my life, and we know exactly what to do.
Right, as the former spokesperson
yes,
for
I was
the
spokesman, and
IDF,
for quite a number of years, and I've done everything.
Many
I was
things.
teaching public diplomacy in two prestigious American universities, Duke and Emory. I was teaching my students, and then they turned to me and said, "Nachman, what happened to Israel? Why are you failing again?" I really have no idea why the IDF itself and Israel as a whole didn't draw any conclusions from previous experiences, similar experiences. What's wrong with us? I ask myself. They should know social media is so powerful now. They should know that visuals are all over the world in seconds. They should know that the Palestinians are doing much better job than Israel. But there's no reason for that. We are a startup nation. Our technology can beat easily every state and every military entity in our region. And we didn't know how to use it.
Right. Now, in order to have this unified, to work with the diaspora on a unified message on, for example, combating anti-Semitism, the relations between Israel and the diaspora, well, let's put it this way. You've openly criticized the way certainly the previous government handled some of those issues. You said there's a breach between much of the diaspora and Israel. Now it's your responsibility. How are you going to go about...
Now I'll try to correct the damage. I was very critical of what the government has done, especially choosing a certain political direction in the United States. Trump was great, but there's another party by the name Democrat. There are some, not saying too much, 75% of American Jews vote Democrats and not Republican. We have to be bilateral. All our history, it was based on Israel running the same relations with both American major parties. And then we neglected the Democrats. And we may pay a price. And that's what happened during the last operation. Criticism from the Democratic Party was rising, both from senators like Sanders and Warren, and then from the young generation as well. And we should look forward for the next generations of... Who is going to be the next leader of the Democratic Party, I'd like to know. Biden is still from the old guard, but who's going to be the next one? And that's why I believe that we should remain in the same way. We should develop and build relations with both parties, right, and enjoy their support in any given. 5 years from now, the new memorandum of understanding between Israel and the United States will hopefully be signed. But I don't know what atmosphere will prevail at the time. Even now, providing weapons to Israel became a controversy in America. That has never been before. We have to listen. We have to be tuned to new streams, new directions in American public opinion in general, and specifically in the Congress, in the Senate and the House.
Right. Now, another source of tension between Israel and much of the diaspora, some of the diaspora, has been, for example, the treatment of non-Orthodox Jewish movements in Israel, the fact that conservative and reform are not recognized along with orthodoxy. Here I want to go into a little bit of politics, because there are members of this new government who say they want to work on correcting this, maybe pass this compromise proposal to allow non-Orthodox movements at the Western Wall to move move forward on the conversion issue. But to do that, this government is going to have to pass some legislation. We saw yesterday a piece of legislation that was related to that, reforming the rabbinical courts. There was a mistake made by the speaker. But the real issue is that it was such a narrow margin. Is this government, with this narrow margin there in the parliament, going to be able to move forward on these kind of controversial issues?
Yes. This is the spirit I would like to bring with me. On my first day, I called the three leaders of the Jewish denominations, the conservative, reform, and Orthodox. And I carried a message from the government, from the Prime Minister, from Naftali Bennett. We are going to be pluralistic. Naftali Bennett himself was all the way for this Kotel compromise. For the Kotel compromise. And he, unfortunately, lost at the time, because there was already a cabinet decision, and then it was suspended. So 2017, never come back. I'd like to bring it back to the cabinet table. I'd like to leave it on their desk and say, guys, we are back in business. And there's no reason whatsoever. And believe me, Calev, if we are able to remove this obstacle, we overnight create a new chapter, new relationship between the diaspora and Israel, especially the American.
This very diverse coalition, and some might say,
but not on this topic.
But I might say divided coalition, agree on these kind of topics.
But not this coalition. Those coalition has no Haredim, ultra-Orthodox, and is able. It's Lieberman, it's Labor, and Meretz. Arabs may not take side, but Bennett should stick to his previous position. Saar too. I mean, why not? Why not?
All right. Well, certainly, though, we know there will be some political pressures.
There will be
on
pressure.
The right.
Okay, but just we have to listen to the reform and conservative movements. They make together over 50% of the American Jewish community. According to the survey we just seen this morning, there are 9% Orthodox, which I love and I like and love each and every one of them. But the majority is non-Orthodox.
All right, Dr. Nachman Shai, we wish you success in your new role as the Minister of Diaspora Affairs. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.